In the new book, Fulfillment, Winning and Losing in One-Click America, author Alec MacGillis gives a ground-level tour of Amazon's impact on the economy and specifically the distribution of wealth and poverty across the country.
MacGillis explores Amazon's status as a trillion-dollar corporation and powers it to dictate America's financial winners and losers. Here to discuss Fulfillment is author and senior reporter for ProPublica, Alec MacGillis himself. Thanks for joining us, sir. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So only about halfway through the book so far, but I think it's important to note that it isn't necessarily about Amazon. It's the story of America told through the expansion of Amazon. So tell us a little about, what you saw in your reporting about how Amazon has just transformed literally our geographic landscape.
Yeah, I came to this book really through the problem of regional inequality and the growing gaps between sort of winner-take-all cities and left-behind towns and cities in our country. Those gaps have been getting a lot bigger in recent years. We've always had richer and poorer places, but those gaps have gotten a lot bigger. And what I found was that Amazon, the other tech giants too, but especially Amazon, are playing a really big role in this sort of sorting. You have this, you have a situation where you have some cities like Seattle and DC, sort of the headquarters cities that are drawing a lot of the wealth from around the country into their boundaries, while a whole bunch of other cities have become sort of the warehouse towns for Amazon. You see this, most kind of starkly in, say, the Baltimore-Washington divide. I live in Baltimore, and the city's really been struggling for years and has now become kind of a warehouse town for Amazon, while just down the road, one of the richest cities in the country, Washington, D.C., is getting even richer now with this new headquarters that Amazon decided to put there, 25,000 new high-paid jobs. It's a classic kind of rich get richer situation.
Yeah, well, and part of what you do in this book is you capture the high level, but you also look at people's first-person experience with how Amazon has changed the economy in their local towns. Can you talk to us through one of those stories?
Absolutely. One of the first people I decided to focus on when I was doing the book was a young man who makes cardboard for Amazon boxes in Dayton, Ohio. And it's a really kind of heartrending, compelling story of a man and his family who, when I met them, were living in a homeless shelter in Dayton while he was working this job making cardboard for $10 or $11 an hour. And I kind of go through his life, the sort of downward mobility of his life. His father had owned a small trucking company delivering auto parts, but that company went bankrupt, and then his son, this young man, ends up making cardboard boxes, and he's really kind of at the bottom of this ecosystem that is sort of supporting this entire landscape of the Amazon empire. And so I sort of take it up from there, this one man making cardboard boxes, all the way up the ladder to Jeff Bezos at the top, making $58 billion last year in 1 year alone.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm so fascinated by is just how these vignettes and these stories tell us the story of hundreds of thousands of people, and also just the way the towns have changed. Could you talk about that? I mean, we have towns where I was fascinated to learn. It was like Dayton, people were like, oh, actually, Dayton is a day's drive from 1/3 of the population. And so that's how it becomes, it's like the Amazonification of cities, and their intrinsic economic value changed dramatically because of this company.
Exactly. Dayton's a very good example. Dayton was a city that was, sort of the Silicon Valley of its time in the late 19th, early 20th century, the Wright brothers, all that. And it's now really become more sort of just like a logistics hub. It's a town that, instead of sort of inventing and making things, is now sort of a place where things get packaged and transported. Another place I focus on is the extraordinary story of Sparrows Point, which is this peninsula outside Baltimore that was once home to the largest steel mill in the entire world. 30,000 people making steel, living in a company town of 5,000 or 6,000 people. That's all been wiped completely clean off this peninsula, and it's now been replaced by a huge logistics business park, including 2 Amazon warehouses. And I actually I spent a lot of time with a man who worked at the steel mill for 30 years, making $35 an hour, then went to work at the Amazon warehouse making $13, $14, $15 an hour, wow, and finally quit because he couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah, well, when local economies get decimated, a lot of things happen. I mean, first of all, as you're pointing out, no longer does that wealth, you don't have the small businesses and the shopkeepers living there, and so the wealth is staying local. It's all getting sucked down and going somewhere else. But also, and you saw this somewhat with Walmart as well, when you have these giant conglomerates, you also end up with workers that have very little power, because you can basically like, okay, I could work at the Walmart or I could work at the fulfillment center. It's not like you've got a plethora of places you can go and offer your labor and pit them against each other. So it creates this control and a total lack of power for the workers in these communities too.
Absolutely, and that's why this big union fight in Alabama right now matters so much. I mean, it's really pretty extraordinary that there is now an actual vigorous union organizing campaign happening at an Amazon warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama, and if that would just make such an enormous difference in terms of bringing workers in these warehouses some additional power, some additional say in their jobs. And if they were able to win that election, and you saw some of that spreading around the country, it would make an enormous difference. I had no idea when I set out to do this book just how kind of timely it would be coming now at the time of this union election, and also coming after a year where Amazon just grew so much wealthier, so much bigger. The numbers are just staggering how much bigger this company's gotten over the course of the pandemic year. And I had no idea when I was setting out that this would be the case.
Yeah, it's such an excellent book. I really recommend everybody go out and buy it. Alec, we really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Next, the MSM's reaction to Biden taking a tumble. That's when Rising continues.